basically, I named this small presentation that I will start with Quiero Ribera del Duero. I do apologize for this. It reveals my basic level of Spanish, and it also feels almost like an election slogan. And for Tim, Maria, and Jorge, you may not be aware of this, but tomorrow we have elections here in Holland. And so we have been bombarded the past 2 weeks with election slogans. So if this sounds like one, then I do apologize. However, it's not about us being elected, but maybe Ribera del Duero being elected. So on that note, talking politics, we just said that Brexit didn't make it easier nor faster. Maybe someone still has to mute. Please, thank you. So we said talking politics, Brexit certainly didn't make it easier nor faster to get samples across the water, Tim. And so unlucky for him, he didn't get the samples yet, but we are lucky. He's so experienced and tasted so many wines that he knew most of the samples that we are going to taste today. So before the distinguished members of this panel will briefly introduce themselves, I will tell you what this presentation is going to look like. We're going to kick off with a presentation about kind of the basics of Ribera del Duero so that we bring everybody up to speed. And then that will take maybe 15, 20 minutes, something like that. Then Tim will take it from there and share with us his experience of having done these top 100 tastings, top 100 Ribera del Duero tastings in the past 5 years, Tim, something like that? 4 years.
Sorry, 4, yeah.
Yeah, 4 years, and sharing with us his insights, what he learned in the past four years, and maybe also look into the crystal ball, his crystal ball of Ribera del Duero. That would be interesting. Maybe talk about vintages, regionality, some exciting things. And then finally, we will taste 4 wines together. 4 wines which deserve to be elected on the Dutch market, I think. And we have 2 winemakers to comment on these wines as well. That is Maria Lopez Repiso, although I saw in the fact sheet it was Amparo Repiso. Is that the same as Maria, more or less?
No, well, Amparo is my mother.
Okay.
And the name of the winery, the commercial name is Sarmentero, but the name of the winery is Amparo. So it's my mom's name. That's why.
Okay. So now we know your mother, and maybe you would introduce yourself, please.
Sure. So, well, I'm Maria. So thank you all for being part of the evening. So I own with my parents a very small winery in Quintanilla de Arriba, which is obviously Ribera del Duero. We're probably one of the smallest wineries in the area. We produce about 30,000 bottles. So very, very small. We own about 7 hectares of vineyard. Everything is Tempranillo. And we started back in 2004 out of 1 barrel of wine, and then we started growing. I've been part of the winery since I remember. My mom is the 4th generation, so wine growers. So I will be the 5th one, and hopefully my son will be the 6th one. We'll see. However, I did move to the United States for 3 years to learn, how they work there. I worked in Napa Valley for 3 years. So after that, I moved back here in 2016 to take care of the winery, and me and my mom were both making the wine together. So,
we detected an American accent. So with which winery did you work?
The very, very famous winery called Castello di Amorosa. It's literally a castle. So if you've been there, you probably saw it or visited it. It's very, very famous. Yeah, so I was there originally for 1.5 years, but then I got the visa renewed, so I moved again for another 1.5 years, and I was doing production and then tours and tastings as well. So a little bit of everything.
Jack of all trades, and maybe Jorge Bombin of Legaris is also Jack of all trades, I can imagine. But Jorge, maybe you would like to introduce yourself as well.
Okay, thank you, Case. Hi, everybody. I'm Jorge Bombin. I'm technical director of Legaris Winery. Legaris Winery is located also in Valladolid area, exactly in Curiel de Duero, which is a small village. Legaris is part of a Raventós Codorniu group, which is one of the oldest, I think it's the oldest winery in Spain. Actually, we own 121 hectares. We grow them organic, all of them. And actually, we are making 8 red wines. Some of them are, I would like to say, they are like our classic range of wines, Roble, Crianza, Reserva. And the rest of the wines, I would like to say they are more new, innovative, all of them with generic back label. One of them, we are going to taste them today, Paramos of Legaris. And the rest are part of another project, which is single village wines. I have been working there since 2008. So this is going to be my 14th vintage. I have been never, you will realize soon that I have never been living in the US like Maria. I have always lived in, Valladolid. Sometimes I have visited the US market, but never lived there. That's all. Thank you. Okay. I hope you will enjoy it, and thank you for attending this lovely tasting. I think we all enjoy this evening tasting.
I hope so too. All right, let's kick off. Well, Tim, sorry. Maybe we. I don't think you need a lot of introduction. That's why, but maybe it's good for us. Maybe there's one person who doesn't know you yet. So.
Possibly. I'll be very brief. I'm Tim Atkin. I'm a Master of Wine and a wine writer, and I specialize in the wines of South America, Spain, South Africa, and Burgundy. I've been writing about wine for longer than I'd like to think or remember. I think it's now about 36 years this year. So, and I've been a journalist all my life, really. So, and I'm very much looking forward to talking to you about Ribera del Duero this evening. Thank you, Case.
Thank you. And so you have been doing these top 100 for 4 years, and then the year before you started to select some 50 best wines or something like that for the London Trade Show.
Yeah, we did 50 the first year, and then since then I've done 3 100s, and the only stipulation, the only grounds I imposed on it was that I had complete freedom of choice, that I could recommend as many wines as I wanted from one winery if necessary, and that the choice was all mine. And I have to say that they've been very good about that they've not tried to impose any wines upon me.
Perfect. Great.
And if anybody wants to download it, it's on my site. But I mean, it's £5, but I'm sure the Conseco could send it to you for nothing if you ask them nicely.
Well, and I'm not sure whether I can reveal what Tim is drinking tonight. He was so sorry for himself that he opened a wine from Dominio de Pingus, and that's a nice bridge to Ribera del Duero, because actually it is maybe the most famous wine region in Spain. But it's not always known, which is kind of strange. But everybody knows Vega Sicilia, everybody knows Pingus, but how many people really don't know Ribera del Duero? And I think something that hopefully we get a bit more clarity about is about the sub-regions and about the identities of these sub-regions It's an interesting region in the sense that it's basically a monovarietal region, and yet there's huge differences in style and quality. So let's go on a first date with Ribera del Duero. The location is straight between Madrid and Bilbao at a high plateau, and this is important. It's a plateau that is tilting towards more than 1,000 meters, starting at 700 meters, and with many regions of altitude, you get distinct diurnal temperature differences. You get extreme weather. There is a huge influence of wind. We are going to look a bit more detail into this. It links 100 villages in an area of 35 by more than 100 kilometers. In most of them in Burgos, and then 25 in the east, which is the highest part of Ribera del Duero, 24 in Valladolid, which is the lowest part, and then 5 in, what did we say? What was what's the part you were in, Maria, again?
I'm in Valladolid, but I think it's missing
Segovia.
So I'm sorry for all the people there that I forgot it. So the east, Soria is the highest and the coolest, and the west is the lowest and the warmest. And we are going to get back to, this is very sensitive. We are going to get back to this map later on, when Tim will take us a bit more into regionality of Ribera del Duero. So climate, well, many people say it's Mediterranean. But I really think it's more continental with Mediterranean influences. Typically, you get a lot of sun hours. You get modest precipitation, but basically that can happen in just a few days. So it's not like in Holland or in England, you know, where it is drizzling for weeks. No, here it will come by storm. In summer, temperatures 40 plus, and in winter -20. So that shows you that basically it is more of a continental climate. And with many of these climates, especially at high altitude, there is a distinct risk of frost. And you will have risk of frost late in fall, late in spring and early in fall. So that means that the season could be very short. And what you need is a grape variety which manages to ripen in a theoretically short season, and yet can withstand the high UV factor and the temperatures, and also is resilient against those stormy winds. And there's one grape variety that does it, and that's Tempranillo, with temprana in its name, which means early. So early ripening grape variety. Well, let's look into some historical tables. So here we see that if we look to the extreme temperatures in different vintages, but in January it could be either 20 degrees almost or -17. In November, almost 30 or -11. So the extremes are really extreme in this area. Even if you go to the medium temperatures, you know, it could be 3 or 8 or 6 or 13 or 21 or 30. So the extremes, whether it is medium or it is absolute, are really phenomenal here. And that means great risks and a lot of variation between vintages. Look at this graph. So the blue one is the absolute extremes minimum temperatures over 30 years, 61, 91. Then we see the gray one is the medium of lower temperatures, then the medium of the maximum temperatures, and then the absolute maximum ones. And I just want to focus your attention to months of May and June, where over the 30 years between 61 and 91, we still had freezing temperatures. And the same counts for September and October. Now, this has never happened within one vintage. However, there is extremes, and especially frost late in spring will put a lot of pressure on the production, as we have seen in 2017. So here we see that the frosts, they go from May to, and then back in October again. So this puts a lot of pressure on the no frost period days, which can vary from 100 to 180 days. Okay, and that's very, very tight. Rainfall, I just mentioned, even though annually it could be 450 mils, if you look to certain days here, 10% could fall on one day, and it's not uncommon to have days with that high rainfall. Sorry. Yeah. What does that mean for yields? Well, yields are extremely variable. In most years, yields will be between 3 and 5 tons, okay? But in 2017, it was just about 2 tons. So less than half of what the normal average is. But even between 3 and 5 tons, I think 18 had 6 tons. So I mean, there's huge variation between the years, and especially in 17, when we had late spring frost, the vine tries to repair it and has a second go, but then the season is so short that it's very hard to ripen those grapes. So high altitude, we discussed it. It also means that you have high UV, and this is something that we see back into the wines. Most of these wines, they have quite ripe tannins, quite smooth tannins, not very aggressive or drying tannins, and that's also protection of the vines for that UV. Sorry, this is very sensitive. Good. So you need good and trained viticulturists, because they have to work around these almost unpredictable circumstances. Soil, well, erosion is flattening the landscape. We have sedimentary soils, we have alluvial soils, In some cases, there's fluvial soils which are moved by the river. The soils are very different, and they also give you different levels of water retention. It's clearly seen here. You can see that the soils immediately at the riverbed are really different from soils on opposite sides of it. Some marl, some limestone, sand, completely different and usually overlapping soils. This is almost a simplification of it. Grape varieties, if we look to 2020, we see Tempranillo or Tinta del País or Tinto Fino, almost 97%, 1% Cabernet, which can do very well if the season is long enough. 1% of Albio, this beautiful white grape, a little bit of Merlot, almost nothing of Garnacha still left, and almost nothing of Malbec, although I have the feeling, but Tim, maybe you want to comment on that as well, that Malbec is gaining in popularity. So basically monovarietal and a little bit of blending of other varieties to add a bit more diversity, although I think most of the diversity is coming from the regionality of the wines. Now, this is one of the fantastic things in Ribera del Duero. It's one of the regions with the oldest vines on average in any wine region in the world. Almost 6% of all hectares are 1 century old. Can you believe this? Almost 10% is 90 years old. 16% is 80 years old, is incredible. More than 20% is 70 years old. And so, I mean, this is one of the real interesting things of Ribera del Duero. I'm not sure, and maybe Tim can comment on this as well, whether they use it enough in their marketing, because I think this is really something special that Ribera del Duero has.
I mean, certainly people like Peter Sissek uses it, you know, talks about the older vines, and I don't know, Emenos Sastre, you know, also in La Hora. So some people do, yes, definitely, but I agree with you that more could be made of it. I think part of the problem is that although there are lots of old vines in the region, the denominación, the appellation, if you like, was only founded in 1982. So people sometimes get confused about that and think, oh, it's a very young appellation, which it is in many ways, but it doesn't mean it can't have old vines, because people were making wines in Ribera del Duero since Roman times.
Well, this is not that very exciting, but I think like in several other wine regions, we have a traditional Spanish winemaking system for Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva. And then some 20 years ago, there was this wave of modern style winemakers putting more emphasis on fruit, less on older American oak, combined it with maybe French oak. And now we are slowly seeing this kind of third wave winemakers who are putting more emphasis on regionality. And I think that's very exciting. So this is what Tim was talking about. So here we have 1982 when they got the DO. And what you see, 5,000 hectares, it quickly grew to 20,000. And then we are now at roughly 24,000 hectares. So this kind of since 15 years, it's not stable. It's slow growth, but you know, it's not dramatic anymore. Grape growers, we are now at 7,800, something like that. So there is also a plateauing of grape growers. And wineries, I am not entirely sure. I think it's around 300, but do you know, Tim?
301.
Okay, so there is still a growth in the number of wineries. But look at the number of wineries in 1982. This means that most of those vineyards, they were blended. They probably the 9 were almost all cooperatives, and they were blending most of these grapes into multi-regional blends, making Ribera del Duero, but not showing any regionality. And I think the 300 wineries are increasingly showing more regionality, which is making this area way more exciting than it's ever been. Okay, so defining altitude, very important, from 720 to 1100 meters. Soils are very important, especially in terms of water retention. We have different styles of winemaking, and I think the winemakers tonight, they will comment on that as well. We have a monovarietal, we have yet great diversity, and we are going to taste some wines to have the proof of the pudding at the end of it. I remember we had a presentation, I don't know, 6-7 years ago in Madrid by Pedro Ballesteros, our MW friend. And so he was asked whether Ribera would be closer to Bordeaux, in his opinion, or Burgundy, which is a kind of a classic, maybe not entirely appropriate comparison. But anyways, he was asked, and he said, well, in terms of wine style, many people would maybe think Bordeaux, but he said it's monovarietal, and he really thought that the future would be in the regionality. And then he turned this map around and said, look at the similarities with Burgundy. So on that note, I think I would like to turn it over to Tim. He has been doing these top 100 tastings for 4 years, which means he has been maybe focused on quality, but from that focus on quality, I think it says a lot about the region as a whole. So Tim, your comments, please.
Thank you very much, Kees. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your perfect English. I'm aware that I'm the only person this evening speaking in my native language, which makes it easier for me. I know that all Dutch people speak amazing English, and I think both of our Spanish participants also speak very good English, so I'll try not to speak too quickly. The things I wanted to talk about tonight, and I might add a few things to what Kees said in his extremely good and complete introduction, was I really want to talk about the difference between perception and reality. I've no idea what the marketplace is like in Holland because I don't live there, but certainly in England, if you present a range of Ribera wines, it comes with a certain amount of what we say baggage that people immediately assume, despite the fame of Vega Sicilia that you mentioned and Pingus, that these are quite big wines, that they're big, they're powerful, they're high in alcohol, they have quite a bit of tannin, they're often heavily wooded. And a lot of my job, it wasn't really my job, my own surprise really, when I went there and started tasting the wines on the ground and tasting a lot more of them and going to the vineyards and looking at them, was the diversity. Yes, it's a single grape, although you'd be surprised how many wines are blended, particularly these old vineyards, and you find this all over the world, especially in the old world, that a lot of the vineyards were actually field blends, that the people who planted vineyards 100 years ago weren't stupid. They basically, particularly in a region like Ribera del Duero, which, as you said, is extreme and is subject to frosts and massive diurnal variation. It's a very extreme wine region in many ways. People planted a variety of grapes. So if you go to, like Dominio del Águila, which is Jorge Monzón's vineyard in Aguilera, La Aguilera, and you know, his vineyards have got everything in them. They've got Bobal in them, they've got Palomino in them, they've got Calagrano in them, they've got Garnacha, they've got everything. So this idea that it's a monovarietal area is true in many ways, but you'd be surprised by how many people use bits and pieces of other things in the wine, either knowingly or unknowingly. I mean, the minimum is only 75%, although most people do way more than that. So this idea of diversity, I think that in those of you, and I'm sure that's true of all of you who know Burgundy and a little bit maybe about Barolo, if I said to you, you know, Pommard, and I said Chambord-Musigny, you'd have a very good idea of what those wines taste like. I mean, generalizing, obviously, that Pommard is going to be more structured, Chambord will be lighter and more floral and a little bit more delicate in style. The same thing maybe with La Mora and Serralunga d'Alba in Barolo, that people would know La Mora tends to be these softer, fruitier wines. Serralunga is on limestone, they're much chalkier, they're denser, more compact, and they age better. We understand those concepts. And yet in Ribera del Duero, people don't get that, at least not yet. Some people know about La Hora because Pingus comes from there, but they don't know about La Aguilera, they don't know about San Esteban de Gormaz, they don't know, unless they know the winery itself, Pesquera de Duero, where it's based. They don't know that these are very different villages in different sub-regions in some cases, that are different altitudes on different soil types and produce very different styles of wines, okay? So the first thing I'd like to get into your heads really is that it's diverse. There's a famous American poet, Walt Whitman, who once talked about somebody containing multitudes, a person containing multitudes. And I would say that's true of Ribera, that even though you've only got one grape essentially with these other things, it's not true that they all taste the same. I mean, nobody ever complains that all red Burgundy tastes the same, even though it's made from Pinot Noir, or that all Barolo tastes the same, or Barbaresco tastes the same because it's made from Nebbiolo. So that's the first thing I wanted to get over to you, really. It is, as you said, and I've repeated, this extreme marginal area. It's in the northern part of the central Spanish plain called the Meseta. The Meseta historically was underwater, which is why you find a lot of limestone in the Meseta generally. This region, I mean, La Mancha, which is part of the same Meseta, people talk there about 3 months of winter and 9 months of hell. So you get, you know, the winters are very, very, very cold. The same thing in Rueda, Castilla y León, all those areas. And the summers are incredibly hot. The key thing I think, about Ribera del Duero is diurnal variation. In summer, the height of summer, you can be out in the day and you think, God, it's hot. And you get to your hotel room at night and you're actually putting on the heating. You can get a diurnal variation, believe it or not, of almost 30 degrees within the same day. And it's that diurnal variation which, as you said, Case, gives you color in the wines. It maintains freshness, or a degree of freshness, in wines that are quite powerful and high in pH. I mean, Peter Sisek of Pingus says that if you're picking grapes in Ribera del Duero with a pH of 3.6, you get green flavors, basically. In other words, you need these slightly riper flavors in this very short growing season to get your tannins ripe. One of the things I've noticed happening a lot is in you know, the time I've been going there, when I first went to Ribera probably 25 years ago, is the emergence of these smaller projects, as Case said. Smaller producers focused on single vineyards. It doesn't mean that historically people didn't and still don't blend across the region. Remember, this is a very varied region. It's a long, thin region. And if you look at even some of the very top wines like Alion, which is a wine from Vega Sicilia, Alto, many of you will know, Ausas, which is made by Javier Ausas, a more recent wine, who was the long-term winemaker at Vega Sicilia, or Garmon, again made by Mariano Garcia, who was another long-term winemaker at Vega Sicilia. Those are blended across the region, right? So they're taking little parcels and blending them together. They're almost like chefs, really adding little ingredients. But increasingly, a lot of people are focused not only on single villages, but on single parcels. A lot of the producers whose wines I really love, like Valdaya, like Domine de Es, like Marta Mate, like Domine del Águila, like the things that Legares are doing, which are these single vineyard wines as well, or single village wines, are increasingly focused on terroir. Case mentioned, I think, the four sub-regions. And one of them is so small, Segovia. There are only 2 wineries there that I wouldn't say you can forget it, but not many people go there. I've not been there, I must say. The bulk of these wines and the bulk of the vineyards are in Burgos, right? A lot of the most famous wineries are in the west of the region in Valladolid, in an area that's known as the Golden Mile. It's a little bit like Las Vegas, because Vega Sicilia is there and Pingus is there. So is Alto. But Dominio de Pingus is based there, but its vineyards are elsewhere in Lahore. And in a minute, we're going to look at the vineyard map, and I'll give you some little idea about what I see as the kind of sub-regions within it that are important. Just to repeat that fact, I said that about 1982 being the start of the DO, but 1864 was the foundation of Vega Sicilia. So Vega Sicilia has been a famous winery for a very long time. It's very interesting if you look at the history of Vega Sicilia that many of the grapes they imported were quite surprising. Pinot Noir, they obviously imported Cabernet Sauvignon, but if you look at the list of varieties, it included virtually everything. A lot of the people in those days were importing grapes from France. This was just before or around the time of phylloxera, and bringing grapes into Spain. And they just put everything in. Remember what I said about those field blends? People were great experimenters. We've mentioned the vine age, and I think that's a very important fact to say. Most of the oldest vines are in the east, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, in an area or a town really called Sant Esteban de Gormaz. Those are also, as Kay said, most of the highest vineyards are out there, but again, I'll give you a little bit more detail about those in a second. And a lot of those vineyards are actually pre-phylloxera. They're so isolated, and Aguila, which is a tiny little, Aguilera rather, what am I talking about? Atauta really, which is a tiny little village out in the east, I think has about, I don't know, probably 25 inhabitants, and the average age is probably over 70. But if you look down into the valley, you see this old area. San Esteban de Gormaz is right up at the right-hand extreme of this map. I hope you can see it. The problem with Ribera is because it's so long and thin. Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you. If Case can put his cursor on it, that would be great. That area out there is very close to the source of the Duero River. The Duero River is obviously the same river as the Douro River, which flows into the Atlantic, close to Oporto, basically. So you can see this river running through it with a series of tributaries. This is a river valley with steep sides on both sides. And these rivers basically run down into the central river. The river is basically going downhill, as I say, towards the ocean. And so the highest point of the river is in the east and the lowest point is in the west. The western part, if Casey, you could just put your thing on that. That is basically that is the Golden Mile, really, that area just in there alongside the river. That's where you find, as I said, Vega Sicilia, which is probably the most famous winery, along with Pingus. So it is a river valley. Helpfully, a road runs through it as well. The N122 pretty much follows the river. So you're driving alongside the river all the way. Yeah. The thing I would say, and I take Casey's point, which is spot on, that many of the highest vineyards over 1,000 meters are in the east, is that there are high vineyards both in the northern bit of Valladolid. If you can just hover there, Piñel de Arriba, which is above. Sorry, whoops. There we go. If we go back one. If we just keep going straight up, there we go, keep going up and up and up, there we go. We're about, no, there we go, just where you were there. We're at about 900 meters there. Fuentespino, if you come south of the river into the southern bit of Burgos and keep going to the right, keep going 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 down a bit, down a bit, down a bit. Fuentespino, do we see it? Down a little bit further down to the right. My right, there we go, keep going, keep going, keep going. Fuentespino, can we see it? Yes, there we go. Right, again, we're over 900 meters there, yeah? And if you go into the northern part of Burgos, so in case if you were to go straight up the hill, basically, yeah, again, we're up there at 950 meters. The very high areas are known as Páramo. And I think when we come on to the Ligares wines, we'll talk about the Páramo in a bit more detail. The Páramos historically were regarded as areas where you could only grow cereal crops, you know, wheat and barley and things like that. Nobody grew vineyards. Anybody who planted vineyards that high, with the exception of the Far East, and that may be why those vineyards have survived, because they were so isolated, and it's a small percentage of what's made there anyway. People thought it was too cold. Remember, this is an extreme region. Frost is a risk, although frost tends to be more of a risk at lower altitudes, obviously because cold air goes down, but you just couldn't get grapes ripe. And climate change has changed that, really. The kind of pivotal vintage in many ways, I think, was 2015, where people thought, ooh, this is actually pretty hot, yeah? And people are starting to get a bit more concerned about picking earlier. Again, that's something maybe we'll talk about with the winemakers. Case asked me to talk about soils, and I'll do it a little bit, but maybe not in too much detail. Maybe we'll mention a bit more when I come on to talk about these loosely defined subregions. It's very complex, as you could see from that map. Clay, marl, sand, gravel, sandstone, and of course limestone. The closer you get to the river, the more chance there is that you will find alluvial soils, these sort of sandier, lighter soils. Doesn't mean they're bad soils necessarily, but I would say they're not as exciting as some of the soils on slopes, where you tend to get a higher percentage of clay, in particular in that central block of Burgos. And limestone, particularly out in the east. You get some also in Fuentespino, a little bit in Peñafiel. There are pockets of limestone all over the place, but clay is the kind of dominant soil type of that central block, Burgos, which dominates the region. Okay. So Paramo, I think, is worth mentioning. We've mentioned the limestone, we mentioned the clay, we mentioned the river. I think that'll do, really. The soils, yeah, I'll just say that they're so varied that Vega Sicilia divides its soil types, in its own vineyards out in the Golden Mile, and their vineyards, very importantly, because this area to the west, particularly close to the river, is lower. As Case said, it's about 740 meters. But the average of the region is about 837 meters, I think, and that's probably higher, I would say, than almost any region in Spain. And I can't think of many that are higher than that. Maybe Gredos is, or bits of that, I don't know. But I mean, certainly it's extremely high. But that warmer bit closer to the western end in Valladolid, a lot of the best vineyards are on the southern bank of the river. That's to say that they face north. Okay, by facing north, they're obviously going to be cooler, right? Okay, so we've talked a little about soil. Vega Sicilia, 19 different soil types they divide their wines into. Peter Sissig at Pingus, 23 different parcels over the space of 20 hectares. So, the soil types are very varied and very complex. It's not just a question of saying, I mean, look at that, it's a mosaic, isn't it? Very, very complex.
Tim.
Okay, very quickly, we get on to the zones and then we'll start talking. Yes, Case, do you have a question?
A question, is there something like a left bank or a right bank or Côte de Nuit?
No, because the overwhelming majority of the wines are on the northern side of the vineyards, are on the northern side of the river. Yeah, I mean, you can see that it's much narrower on the southern side, and the development of those areas like Fuentespino and also the Paramo, particularly in the south, but also in the north, is comparatively recent. We're talking the last 15 years, really, when it's been warm enough, really, for people to get grapes ripe. So not really. I mean, I think the key thing is not really east to west. It's aspect and altitude. So aspect and altitude varies within the region quite dramatically. And even though it's true, as you said, that the highest vineyards are in the east and the lowest are in the west, the highest vineyards in the west are higher than the lowest vineyards in the east, if that makes sense. So, I think think of it as, it's on a slope effectively, but there are huge variations within it. We've talked about the altitude, just in terms of picking difference, and the winemakers will tell us more, I'm sure, but you can get something like 3 weeks of difference between the latest vineyards to be picked, which would be in those very high areas, and the earliest, which are generally speaking closer to the river. And the areas I wanted to talk about very briefly, and I think there are more in these, but I think that these are the ones that people are beginning to talk about, and this is maybe a way of understanding the region and breaking it down, is the one I've talked about in the east, which is Soria, the province of Soria, which is a Tauta around San Esteban de Gormaz. These are the oldest vineyards. They're ungrafted. They're often on limestone. And historically, this was a marginal area, okay? South of the river, we've mentioned, I talked about Fuentespino, remember, case, there we go, that little area around there. And Moradilla de Roa, both of those areas are becoming increasingly important. They're between 900 and 1,000 meters. That's the southern bit of Burgos. It's a slightly newer area in terms of its development. North of the river, there are two very important areas that people talk about. One is the so-called triangle, the triangulo. And if you keep going up from Fuentespino, case, I don't know if you can see this, but the triangle really is, the points of the triangle would be Gumiel de Izan, La Aguilera, and Sotillo de la Ribera. So you can see, if you see that sort of castle-like thing, and it's obviously a region of castles, keep going straight up from Fuentespino, and you can see that there we go. That's the triangle, basically. A lot of old vines in there, a lot of limestone, a lot of mixed vineyards, and a lot of family-owned properties. Basically, it's a place of small holdings, low yields. If we go to the west, you find what is known as the diamond, and the diamond, the 4 points of the diamond are Olmedillo de Roa, La Hora, the famous village of La Hora, Roa, which is where the Consejo Revelador is based, and I suppose Membria de Castrejón, and maybe Pedrosa if you want to have a fifth point of a diamond. I know that's not really a diamond if it's got 5 points. But that area there tends to be more clay dominated. It's where the majority of the vineyards are planted. There's a bit of everything there, but a lot of the most famous vineyards are there, particularly if we're talking about La Hora. But the closer you get to the river, and remember that basically the river is comparatively flat vineyards close to the river, then you go up onto a terrace, and then you start rising steeply up the slopes on both sides of the river. Basically, as I said, it was a river valley with these steep sides. Okay, so that's our diamond. And then we've already mentioned the Golden Mile, as I said, which is where Vega Sicilia is. And a lot of the people who are based there, well, not a lot, but some of the people who are based there don't necessarily get all of their grapes from there. Some do, and some don't, and we'll hear a little bit more from one winemaker. Just one last thing, I think, before we get on to the wines. A case asked me to talk about vintages, and they do vary massively, not just in terms of frost risk. If you look at the years where frost was a significant factor, 2017 was the worst, but 2001, 2007, 2008, 2010, and 2017 were all frost years. So remember, yields are often low. It depends when the frost happens. Sometimes frost happens as late as June, believe it or not. I mean, I think that is probably unique in the world. Picking dates tend to go into October very often. Then it starts to get cold. But in 2013, they were picking on the 18th of November. So, you know, you can see that you can pick late, but you'd be pushing it, basically. Vintages tend to be divided into two camps, and slightly silly in one sense. They're called Mediterranean and Atlantic. We're nowhere near the Atlantic. As Kay said, this is a continental climate. So there's not really much of an Atlantic influence. What they mean by that is cooler and wetter years on the one hand, and hotter, drier years on the other. And the hot, dry ones recently were 2009, 2010, 12, 15, and 17. 19 is kind of between the two, I would say. The colder, wetter ones, 7, 8, 10, 13, 14, 16, 18 and 20. 20 was a pretty wet year. Depends which ones you like. I would say that the wet years tend to be more variable and varied. And that's a good thing, as we all know that the best winemakers and the best viticulturalists tend to deal best, I think, with adverse conditions. So these cooler years, and remember this is an extreme place of very hot temperatures during the day, these cooler years arguably produce more elegant wines. I particularly like 14 and 16 and 18 as vintages, not across the board, but I think that, you know, they're maybe not as consistent as something like 17 and 15, but there are some really lovely wines produced in those vintages. Remember, we talked about climate change and the whole area is warming up. Since, you know, if you look at the vintages before 2003, which was a very hot year, the people always started picking in November. Since 2003, only 2008 people have started in October. Yeah. So basically, even in 2013, this wet year, they started earlier. A few of the other things I'd just like you to bear in mind while we're tasting these wines today, and Case wanted to, well, maybe get the winemakers to talk a bit more about it, is this thing of tradition and modern. The thing I think about tradition and modern styles, if you will, traditional modern styles, is it's not a dichotomy, it's not an either or. It's more of a continuum. So there are points along a continuum and people sit on those points. And obviously some wineries produce more modern styles alongside more traditional styles. It just depends. So, you know, I would say that more traditional styles tend to be Asian American oak, tend to be a bit more balsamic, in inverted commas. You'll be familiar with those styles from other regions in Spain. The other things I would ask, and we'll talk about this with the winemakers, is this thing of single parcel versus regional wines. Picking dates, remember what Peter Sissek said about those pH levels. Is 3.6 too low? Not according to some people, it is according to him. Acidification, it's okay to pick late and acidify, many people do. Fermentation temperatures and extraction. Tempranillo is not a grape variety with particularly large amounts of color, even in Ribera del Duero. I mean, it has more in Ribera del Duero than probably most other places, really. But how much you extract and for how long you do it is important too. The idea of alcohol, a lot of these wines are quite high in alcohol, and Tempranillo is not a particularly acidic grape. So Brettanomyces, which some people like more than others, that slightly funky character is also a factor sometimes in wineries. And some people have it and don't mind it, and some people have it and hate it, and some people never want to have it. Oak type, what I mentioned in French and American oak, the size of the barrels, there's no restriction on the size of the barrels. You can use, if you're making a generic wine called a cosecha, as we said earlier, the amount of time you leave the wine in oak and the origin of the wood. Balance versus power, that thing I talked about at the beginning, the perception that the region makes powerful wines. I think increasingly the best wines are not about power, they're about balance. And they're the wines that I like and the wines I included in my top 100. Vine age, we all mentioned, and obviously yield, and then machine picking against hand picking, and the use of whole bunch fermentation. I've probably gone on for way too long, and you're probably thinking, when's he going to shut up so we can taste the wines and hear from the winemakers? And the answer is now. So I think if there's anybody who wants to ask me questions at the end, but I think it's more important that we hear from the winemakers, because they do something far more important than I do, and that's actually make the stuff. So over to you, Case.
Yes, thank you, Tim. One more question, because I recently did a book, and I found out that Tempranillo actually in the past 40 years has been catapulted into this group of mega varietals, and so. Apparently around the globe, especially in Spain, of course, but it's extremely popular.
Yeah.
And everybody knows that it's not great in its acidity. It's maybe the weakness of Tempranillo. But here at altitude, it's almost an insurance. It's protected against itself here. And that makes it, for me, so exciting in Ribera del Duero.
I think that's very true. The only thing you have to remember here, and it's the other side of altitude, is that you have to wait longer to get the grapes right, particularly in this very short ripening window. We're looking, as that figures you put up of the days without frost or without frost risk. In the coldest years would be 100 days, and that's not much to get your grapes right. So yes, you're right. Extreme sunshine, wind, all those things, diurnal variation. It is a unique combination. I think that the Tempranillos that are produced here don't taste like the Tempranillos produced in other wine regions of Spain. And Tempranillo is a grape variety that's grown in many places, obviously across the region from Toro to Rioja to Penedès and so on. But there is something unique about this landscape, this very savage landscape in many ways, that does produce these particularly unusual styles. I agree with you.
Okay, so let's start tasting these wines, and everybody who has questions, please hold your breath for just a little while, and then we'll definitely have time for that. So we start with El Patio. 2019 is 100% Tempranillo. It has this back label of cosecha, 740 meters on sandy limestone soils, and yet it is quite vigorous here because it gets all these runoff waters from the hills. No added sulfur dioxide, vegan certified, 13.8% alcohol, quite a deep purple, almost you almost think of carbonic maceration when you taste the wine. You know, it has this great fruit intensity, good freshness. You know, a bit sticky tannins, I would say, but you know, it's a powerful Beaujolais. If I'm not, you know, if I'm trying to position it somewhere, it's a beautiful wine. You know the winemaker, Tim, and you have tasted this wine.
Yes, I do. This is a very interesting winery. That it's quite close to Vega Sicilia. It's not too far away from where Maria's winery is as well. He's kind of on the other side of the road from Vega Sicilia. So this is a classic example of vineyards that face north. Remember, I talked about Valladolid. The key thing was to have these vineyards, and his vineyards are in a bowl, really. He's had about seven hectares. He's a chap called Alejandro Moyano, who's an architect. And if you see the winery sitting up there on a hill, it looks like something designed by an architect, which is what it is. It's kind of a box, but it's kind of a spectacular box once you get inside it. This wine is really interesting in that it's fermented in concrete eggs. It's made with stems. I think, I'm not sure if it's entirely carbonic maceration, as you said, but certainly he's using some stems. Whether he's adding them back in or using a whole bunch of fermentation, I don't know. But really interesting project. I mean, I like his wines very much. They're extremely elegant, and they're quite different from a lot of the wines that you get in Valladolid, which tend to be these sort of bigger, riper styles. His, I think, have got lovely freshness and poise to them, and he doesn't use a lot of oak on his wines. I mean, interestingly, his top wine, Abrir las Alas, comes from La Hora. So he also has a vineyard in La Hora. Remember, La Hora was part of the diamond shape, yeah, clay. There we go. But I think this is a really interesting wine. I'm pretty sure, I don't know what size bottles you guys have got. He only sells it in magnums usually. Have you all got a magnum? Of course I haven't, because UPS didn't deliver me any wine. But
no, we don't have any magnums. But that's interesting. 19 kind of vintage.
19 was a warmer vintage. I think a very good vintage. Yeah, I mean, excellent vintage. I think that the Consejo Regular rated it as excellent, and I think rightly so. I think 19 is an extremely good vintage. All over Spain, actually. You know, I think that 19 was or northern Spain. So yeah, I mean, 19 is a smart vintage. Remember that those cooler vintages like 18, 16, 14 are harder to generalize about, really, because they're of these sort of localized conditions and basically how people dealt with the cooler conditions, and in some cases the rain.
Okay, Maria, we are on the Sarmentero.
Thank you for waiting, Maria. Sorry to go on so long.
And but maybe before we say anything, maybe it's good you kick off and tell us a bit about the vineyards and the winemaking and how you would describe the wine.
Yeah, so we're located in Valladolid, very close to the previous wine you guys tasted. Again, we own 7 hectares of Tempranillo, facing north as well. The wine that you're about to taste is 100% Tempranillo. What it probably makes us a little bit different is that all of our wines that we produce are all done through natural fermentation. So it's indigenous yeast and bacteria. We always do hand harvesting, no matter if it is for a rosé that we produce out of Tempranillo or the reserve, is always hand harvesting. This is aged for 12 months in just French oak. So I think you can, for our point of view, it's a more elegant style than using just American oak. And what we do, so it's not as overpowering and not so oaky, we actually mix the barrels. So it's all 225 liters barrels, but we mix the uses. So it's not everything new oak. So it's about, I cannot say an exact percentage, but it's about 35 to 45% new oak, and then we just start using second, third, and fourth use of barrels. That's actually very, very important for us. No matter the wine you produce, just let the grape express, the fruitiness, the flavors. I'm not sure if you're tasting it or if you have bottle of wine in front of you. This is a 2018 vintage. As Tim said, it was a wet year, so spring was pretty wet. However, September was actually pretty warm. We started harvesting at the end of September. I believe it was September 27th, if I'm not mistaken. We normally tend to harvest before than other wineries around the area because our average yield is actually very low. And that year, 2018, was actually even lower because the vines were still affected by the frost from 2017. This wine particularly comes, its majority or its main percentage from the biggest vineyard. So the vineyard that was planted in 1996, dry farming. However, we tend to mix vineyards, which is exactly what you guys were talking about before in the previous minutes. Alcohol is 14.5, so kind of normal for the area. And however, it can be called Crianza. I don't know if you can see it in the image. We always label it with the cosecha one. In the label here, we tell you the months it's been aged. It's actually fun. The fact behind it is because, again, we started with one barrel.
You like pink. You like pink, no?
Exactly. I like pink. That's the reason why. Well, the reason behind it is because our first time producing Crianza, so a wine that we wanted to age, or we aged for a year in the barrel and then 12 months in the bottle, was 2005. So when we order the labels to the appellation, they say you can't call it Crianza because you have to have a minimum production at the winery of 50 barrels. That vintage 2005, we only had 4 barrels of production. So we kept it that way. Now we have more than 50 barrels, but we just step our foot down and we say we're not changing it. But that's the reason why you will see it like that. This is a fun fact. We make about 2018. We made 12 barrels of this wine. Normally we're between 10 barrels or 15 production. Again, we're very small, so I hope you're enjoying it. And let me know if you have any questions.
It's a very smooth style. It definitely has more complexity than the first one, but this cedar, this toastiness really gives it more complexity, and it's almost velvet. Now it has this beautiful mouthfeel, creamy texture, I would say. So and I said it's in a way a Crianza style. So I was thinking why cosecha, but I also fully respect people who don't want to have Crianza anymore at the back label. No, that's maybe a philosophical choice. No.
Yeah, we were mad at the app. No, I'm just kidding, because they're gonna watch this.
Tim, you see that more often?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that Crianza doesn't have a particularly good image, as a name. You see so much. I don't mean from Ribera only. I mean, particularly all over Spain, that you see so much cheap Crianza from places like Valdepeñas and things like that. That I think that the name Crianza has been slightly devalued, which is a shame. And I think that's one of the reasons why, I don't know, Maria, what you think, but why a lot of people are using cosecha, generic labeling on the back. It gives you more freedom. As you say, there's no regulation about the size of the barrels or how many barrels you have to have in the cellar. I mean, I think Ribera is a little bit more relaxed about this than some people, but there is a national Spanish law, I think, to use Crianza Reserva or Gran Reserva. The largest barrel you can use is 300 liters. I think I'm right in saying that.
Yeah, you're right.
And Maria, is there anything that you took from Napa and that you used explicitly here?
Probably trying to produce well, Napa wines have nothing to do, but like trying to produce more like fruit forward without more elegant style of wines. However, my mom was producing bomb wines before, so really good ones. She's not gonna like me when she watches the video if I say that. No, but we're producing a wine with a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon, or not a little bit, but it's out of the appellation, a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon. So that's a personal project. When you come over, you'll taste that wine. But talking about these wines is basically just trying to use the best grapes, lower yields, French oak, which is Napa normally uses. I'm not gonna say 100%, but like most of the wineries French oak. So a better, elegant style, like playing with the uses, new oak and used oak, so you can achieve the fruit and also the barrel there. So I would say that.
Great, thank you. Jorge, we are going to your wine, Legares. This is one of the top wines from the range. Maybe you want to explain in more detail about the background and the winemaking.
Sure. As an introduction, I would like to say that Paramos is our cool climate Tempranillo. Paramos de Legaris 2016, which is the wine that we are going to taste right now. In English, should be like Paramos de Legaris should be like Legaris Riches. I think Tim already talked about that. The rich, Ribera del Duero, the Paramos, is the typical feature of this region. These areas are located at the top of the hill. So the main altitude, or the average altitude in these Paramos, in these ridges, is about 900 meters above sea level. So that's why we say that it's our cool climate Tempranillo, is because for this project we already selected 3 Paramos, 3 areas, and you can see the map in the front label. This is the Duero River, and 2 of these Paramos, 2 of the ridges are located in the western part of the appellation. One is Pesquera de Duero, and the second one is Peñafiel. And the third Paramo is a bit far away from there. Tim already talked about that, Moradillo. Moradillo de Roa is for me, one of the most exciting villages in the appellation. It's located in the south of the appellation.
Yeah, down south. Remember near Fuentespino. Yeah?
Close to Segovia.
Yeah.
I was a bit confused because on the tech sheet it said Roa. No?
Yeah, but there's Moradillo de Roa.
But it's far away from Roa. Yeah, it's far away from Roa. So we have.
But there are lots of places called Quintanilla. They're nowhere near each other.
No, not Tempranillo. So we have many riches on this area, and for this project, for this wine, we already selected 3. 2 of them are in Valladolid area, and the third one in Moradillo de Roa. With this wine, we want to bring out the fruit of Tempranillo and the terroir of these high altitude riches of Ribera del Duero. This wine is 100% Tempranillo, so we are just focused on this variety. I agree with Tim that a long time ago nobody planted vineyards on these high areas because only crazy people. So that's why we use 20-year-old wines for this wine. So because we are already focused on altitude, about 900 meters above sea level. We don't talk about oak aging. We already do a short aging in oak to keep the maximum free character and purity expression, but we don't do anything, or we don't write it on the back label. We already have our Crianza and Reserva. This is our classic range, but we also like pink. We put it a generic label. This is Cosecha, this is 16. And I think it's important, because when you are using a generic label, it's because you are not giving extra importance about the aging of coke, number of months. I think our issue for this one is to talk about the terroir. I think we are focused on terroir, we are focused on higher risk, and this is our issue for this wine.
Can you talk a little bit about this wine? This is a blended wine, a blend of three regions, but you also make three wines which are a level above in terms of price and I think quality, which are village wines. They're more site specific, aren't they? Can you just tell the people about those, because they're really interesting too?
Exactly. This is Paramos. We started this project in 2014, and exactly that's at the end. It's a blend of three vineyards, high altitude vineyards. Next step, in 2015, we started with an exciting project, which is single village wines. What we started making is to make wine from different areas in Ribera del Duero. Our issue is to show how diverse is the appellation. You know, if we in the same vintage, 2015, we made 3 different Tempranillo in 3 different villages of the appellation. And I agree, Tempranillo, Ribera del Duero should be an easy appellation, no? Mostly one variety. But what we want to show with this new project is how different could be our wines just because we grow them Tempranillo in different areas. We selected 2 villages in Burgos, Olmedillo, which is in the center of the appellation, Moradillo in the south, and we also launched a new wine from Soria, which is located in Alcubilla de Avellaneda. So at the end, we want to show how rich and how diverse is the Tempranillo of our appellation.
And which is the highest? The Alcubilla?
Moradillo is close to 1,000 meters, 973 meters.
Yeah.
You know,
and what about the wine from Alcubilla? 900?
Alcubilla is 930 meters.
Okay.
So, and it's really crazy because we start picking our Curiel de Duero is where our Legaris is located in the western part of the appellation, and almost between 3 and 4 weeks later, we pick the fruit of Alcubilla. So it's huge difference. Same variety and almost 4 weeks of difference between the ripeness between these areas.
And in the end, do you think your best wines will be blended or will be vineyard, site-specific wines?
I think as we are every year more focused on terroir, I think best wine should be one single village. So I love, we also do blends in Paramos, in Crianza and Reserva, but our top wines nowadays are single village wines.
I think it's also fantastic that, you know, you work for a big company, and there are a lot of big companies from all over Spain that have invested in Ribera, and I think it's great that a big company is producing these small quantity wines of such high quality. I mean, you've won lots of awards for your wines, and you're very modest, so you won't tell everybody how famous you are and how good the wines are. But I think that these have been a fantastic step for the region. You know, to have a company, you know, like yours promoting villages is very important.
Yeah, I agree that we are, I would say, I don't know if a big producer, I don't know, maybe, or one of the biggest, but we are able to make 1.5 million bottles, but we are also able to make a small blend, single vineyard, which is only 2,000 bottles in the same winery with the same winemaking team. And I think that nowadays we are paying more attention on the terroir, and we are really excited about these new projects, which are more focused on the villages and about the diversity of the appellation.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jorge. We will finish this brief tasting with this Pagos de Anguix Barrueco, whatever that means. Maybe somebody can explain me. But it's from 2017, 850 meters, so a bit lower than the Paramos de Legaris. 30-40 years old vines, 15 months, French oak barrels, most of it new, This is a much more powerful, wine with vanilla, spices, tobacco, cacao, coffee. It's soft, it's sweet, it's ripe, it's quite powerful. No, in that sense, it is. We have tried to work our way through the styles of the different wines. We started with this really fruit-driven Joven style wine, and then we got a more complexity, more complexity, and a bit more oak influence, velvety style, and then the Paramos, which is again is a bit more tighter and still quite young, with those also balsamic tones, but very good tannin structure and style, and then this more powerful style. So we really get different styles here, and maybe it's time for me to not share the presentation and go back to how do I do this?
Case, you should just say where this comes from. That this is obviously from, as its name suggests, from Anguix. And Anguix is in that area, that diamond that we talked about. So
that's close to Burgos, no? Or?
No, it's close to La Hora, really.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just to the northwest of La Hora, you can see.
Where's La Hora here? Right?
Yeah, just keep going up. That should be Anguix there. Anguix left a bit, up a bit. Yeah, that's Anguix. Yeah. So Anguix, more of these clay soils, and these tend to be, I think, often slightly more powerful wines. Pedrosa makes these quite dense styles. I think Anguix, and this is a 15% alcohol wine. So when people talk about their image of Ribera, I think this is, without criticizing this wine because I like it, is the image that many people have in their head of Ribera. It's powerful, it's lots of oak, it's 15% alcohol, it's a rich, dense, plush style, well upholstered style, I would say, and very different from the other wines. I mean, I haven't tasted Maria's wine, but listening to you guys describe it very well, I thought I've got a pretty good idea of what it tastes like, but the other two wines I do know.
All right. Any questions from any of the people attending this session?
They're all asleep.
No, I'm not. I have a question. My name is Jaap. I work for an importer in the Netherlands, which represents the wines from Alejandro Fernandez. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering about your feelings, Tim, in consideration to the usage of American oak, because they're only using American oak for quite some time. We didn't taste any wines from Ribera with American oak tonight.
Yeah.
But what is your feeling about that?
I think more of a traditional style. I think there's definitely a place for it. I think that Tempranillo works, particularly Tempranillo from Ribera, works very well with American oak. If you like that slightly sweeter character of American oak, and lots of people do. I think that his winery, I mean, he's sadly not directly involved with it anymore because of a sort of slight dispute within the family, sadly. But his winery was very important. That Robert Parker described it as the Petrus of Spain, and that he was a grower who became a producer. And I think Alejandro Fernandez is a key figure in the development of the region. So I think he's a great figure, and I think that style that he created, and even the family who still own the winery have been true to that style with American oak, is a very valid style. I think lots of people like that style, and I think it's part of the diversity. I think that everything from Burgundian style wines, which sometimes have some whole bunch, and these higher altitude wines with more acidity, and that he's at the more traditional end of the spectrum, I would say. There are more traditional wines that are more balsamic and that are aged for longer on release. His wines still have good fruit, or I'm saying his wines, I mean his family's wines. but I think that Pesquera is an important producer in stylistically and especially for the history of the region.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Ebert?
Okay, so if I may, my name is Ebert van der Waal. I've been working for Wine Import for 30 years already, Tim. And we've been importing Schwager Navarra since the second vintage and Dominio de Aguila. You probably understand why the connection there is. You know Jorge Mazon well, I probably, you mentioned it earlier. What do you think about Albio and the possibilities of co-fermentation with Albio together as a solution also to the high pH you find in Ribera?
I think that's a very good question. Historically, I'm sure you probably know this, but Ribera was actually a rosé region. In other words, they co-fermented Albio Mayor, with Tempranillo. It then subsequently became a red wine region. So these two grape varieties have grown up side by side. There's a strong suggestion that Tempranillo is, if not necessarily native to Ribera, but certainly the oldest mention of Tempranillo was in a text, I think, in the Middle Ages, where somebody talked about las Tempranillas. Albio is a very old grape variety, and I think that they're actually related. I've forgotten what the parent-offspring relationship is. I think that Albio is a parent of Tempranillo. So it's a very old grape variety. It's a fantastic grape variety. It was, as many of you will know, is now authorized from 2019 to make white Ribera. The best white Ribera is made by Jorge, and sadly he's decided so far not to call it a Ribera. He wants to go on calling it, I don't know what he calls it, whether it's a Vino de Mesa or Vino de España. It doesn't really matter, frankly. It's such a great wine that it's the supreme example of a white wine from Ribera. And I think I don't know if it's 100% Albio Mayor. I suspect there are other things in it, given the age of his vineyards. I mean, the problem is, Albio Mayor is actually the #2 grape variety in Ribera. We've seen that 96% is Tinto Fino, Tinto del País, but Albio is #2. So there's actually quite a bit of Albio, and there's quite a bit of old vine Albio. I think it would be a shame to put it into red wines because it's such a good grape on its own. I'd like to see more white Riberas, adding more diversity to the region. In terms of pH, I mean, a grape variety I'd like to see planted more of is Garnacha. I mean, Case mentioned Malbec earlier. I think Garnacha is a Spanish grape. It's arguably as good a grape as Tempranillo, and some people, me included, would say it can be better than Tempranillo. It's planted in just as many places. So I would like to see the region authorize the production of pure Garnachas. I mean, there are a few of them, but they're sold as Vino La Tierra de Castilla y León, or encourage people to plant more of the grape, because I think that Garnacha's got better acidity. It's a very good climate change grape variety as well, in that it retains acidity. It works in drought conditions. It doesn't need irrigation. It works in a variety of soil types. So that would be my suggestion. But I totally agree with you about Albio, and I think that Jorge's white wine is one of the great. I mean, I tasted it this year, and I gave it 97 points. I thought it was one of the great white wines of Spain. So can't say better than that. Not enough of it, sadly.
Yes.
If you've got some, drink it.
Yeah, that's true. I got a few bottles in the cellar. Okay, thank you very much for your comments on that.
So and you're talking about Jorge's wine, and he's not responding yet.
Oh, sorry. Jorge
Monzón.
Jorge
from the
Monzón.
Vino del Águila.
No, Jorge Bombín.
Somebody else.
And another famous Jorge.
He's the other Jorge.
The other Jorge.
That is many. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm also having a question. My name is Mark. I work for LFE in the Netherlands, in Porto as well. I particularly like the style as well of the first wine. The more fruit-driven wine, the more lighter style wine, I would say. Yeah. In a lot of other countries or origins, you see that this kind of style of wines is really hot and happening, and people like a little bit lower alcohol percentage, a little bit easier drinking. Do you believe that this kind of style is also going to work more and more in Ribera, or is Ribera more the style for this heavier oaky wines that the other three represents?
I mean, that style of wine that he makes is I'm not sure if it's unique, but it's certainly rare. I mean, a lot of people still make Joven styles, but the way he's doing it, with no added sulfur, which is, if you want to call it natural, natural has no strict definition, but you could call it a natural wine, and I think he does. I don't know of anybody else making that style. I'd like to see more of them, actually, because I think that too many Riberas have too much oak, and people, I think, often use oak to cover not particularly interesting wines. And I think what he's doing there, you can see that that's a very good site. And I told you where the site is. It's close to Vega, and all of Vega's best vineyards are on the southern side of the river, facing north. I'd like to see more of them, and I think what you said is right. I think that there's a real market for people. I mean, particularly with people of your generation, I think are slightly less interested in oak, and they're more interested in stories and a sense of place, of origin and of vineyard expression. I mean, okay, that's a stylistic wine in the sense that he's using carbonic maceration and no added sulfur, but I think you can see that it has a personality. So I agree with you. I'd like to see more people doing that, and I'd like to see fewer people using oak just as because they think, oh, we've got to use oak, it's Ribera, and a lot of these new people that I mentioned, the smaller producers, and this is also true of Jorge tonight, are using less wood in their top wines. They're using bigger oak, they're using older oak, or they're just using less oak. And I think that those wines, to me, are increasingly exciting. I really like them.
And
Right,
I think that the first wine has also this unique combination. It's not a fruit bomb, it has a serious style to it. It has really good concentration. So it's and I said Beaujolais, but it's anything but, because it has that fruit intensity, but it has much more flesh and much more oomph to it, and that's what I really like about this wine. And I didn't miss the SO2 at all in this wine, and I don't know how well it keeps, but it really impressed me.
He I mean, I don't know about the sample you had. He often bottles it with a little carbon dioxide. He's certainly working, obviously, reductively.
No sulfur added. So,
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he bottles it with quite high levels of carbon dioxide, and obviously, sulfur is a natural product that occurs during fermentation. So there's some sulfur dioxide, but he's definitely not adding any.
Yeah. All right. Any more questions? No, Eric?
Now's your time to ask all the experts that are in the Zoom meeting. Please ask them. The winemakers and Tim and Kees as well. They make time for us, as well as you did also make time for us to join the meeting. But don't be ashamed, please.
Maybe I would like to ask a question to Jorge, because and I know we were explicitly asked not to ask any commercial questions to you, but just from a personal point of view, Jorge, what kind of partner would you like to have? What kind of people would you like to work?
Long-term partner. As Codorniu, as I already said, Legaris belongs to Codorniu Group, which is the oldest winery in Spain. It was established in 1551, so a long time ago. So as we do in another areas, so we work with another areas, we always look for long-term partners. So we are not looking for just 1 year contract partners, not at all. We are always looking, as it's the same as when we were establishing the Ribera del Duero in 1999. We planted all the vineyards because we want to establish in this area for a long time. The same happened with the business. We are always looking for long-term partners.
Great.
That is I would like to say that for Legaris, our biggest partner, our biggest market is Switzerland, and they are Swiss people never change. They are brand. They are always looking the same, and that's why we are working properly with the Swiss market, because we have been working with them for a long time and never change it. So we are looking for this kind of partners.
And they are on time, and we too, because we promised you know, 90 minutes max, and there we are, Freddy. So maybe I will hand it back to you, okay?
Yeah, I'm proud of you all. No, thank you so much for all the information, and it was really interesting to listen at. And especially thanks to Maria and Jorge to make time for us all the way from Spain to tell us about your amazing winery. And I hope everybody got to ask their questions and knows everything that they want to know about your wineries and about your amazing wines. And I also really want to thank Tim and Kees. And Tim, I hope that UPS will still bring the package so you can join the wine. You can enjoy the wines later.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you may have any other questions, please let me know. I can get you all the information if you want. And I hope you enjoyed it. Even though we are not in the same room, we were still connected by the wines and via Zoom. So yeah, once again, I hope you enjoyed it, and many thanks to Ribera del Duero to make this possible. And yeah, let's bring more Ribera del Duero wines to the Netherlands.
Perfecto. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
See you, everyone.
Okay, thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for the time. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Yes. Okay, thanks again, Maria. Oh.
Same note, Liv.